Know the score. This is the episode with Don and Tyler. We'll name it later. In five, four, three, two.
You are listening to Know the Score, presented by the CSPN. You can listen to us on a variety of platforms via iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Podomatic. I'm your host, Tyler Ball. You can find me at TABALL number one on Twitter. And joining me on tonight's podcast will be Don Delarente. And you can find Don at Don Delarente on Twitter. What's going on, Don?
Hey, Tyler, bring Don back in again. He just rejoined the call.
Got it.
Sorry, fellas. I hit the end call button instead of the unmute button.
No problem. I'm gonna bring you back in 5, 4, 3, 2. Joining me on tonight's podcast is my partner in crime, Don Delarente. You can find him on Twitter at Don Delarente. What's going on, Don?
Hey, what's going on, Tyler? How are you?
Well, this is another episode of DC Falling, same as it ever was.
Oh, man, this is a very sensitive subject to me because, I root very hard for a couple of these DC teams. And I
Same.
was hoping that the Capitals would actually turn it around and get over the hump this year, but unfortunately, it's not the case. Same old Capitals, even though they did fight hard.
Um, we're gonna lead off. That's gonna be the lead off for tonight. We're gonna talk about DC falling pretty much. Same scenario 2 years ago where you had a uh, Capitals game 7, a Wizards game 5, and a Nationals game. Nationals rallied. National in 2015, Nationals rallied. The Wizards lost game 5, and Capitals would lose game 7. And would you know, the same thing happens on Tuesday night. On Wednesday night, the Capitals rallied to force a game 7 against the Penguins. Uh, the the Wizards headed into Boston for game 5 against the Celtics. They're falling behind 2-0. They blew out the Celtics in both games in DC. Uh, both of those games featured 20-point runs by the Wizards, and on to game 5. And meanwhile, the Nationals in the Beltway series took on the Baltimore Orioles. So DC was finally the center of the sports world for a while, and unfortunately, as we say, it's DC sports. The I think DC leads all the metro areas with the team without participating in without having a championship. I think it's what. Um, yeah, it's been a while. DC has not had a championship since the Redskins in '91.
Unless you count MLS.
Unless you count,
DC,
yeah. Unless
these
they're
two
four.
united.
hmm
But
Yeah,
yeah,
we
in the
in the
majors.
four majors. Yeah,
Yeah.
91.
Yep.
Wow.
Um, it just seems like the DC teams are always not ready for prime time. Seems like when the most eyes are on them, they seem to play the smallest. So that's kind of been the case here with the Capitals when they were down 3-1. Nobody kind of gave them much hope. They were kind of left for dead. And then they went on to win 2 games in a row, forced a game 7. Game 7 at home. Everybody's looking at them. And they come up fairly small. I mean, the Penguins pretty much dominated them. Um,
It's
it was just like, wow.
it's interesting because Washington's strategy to rally back from 3-1, uh, Coach Barry Trotz made the line switch, moving moving Alex Ovechkin to the third line, and both the first line and the third line came up big. Those, you know, uh, they got help from Nick Backstrom scored in games 5 and 6. Uh, Ovechkin even got into the act and started forcing the action. Washington started to put pucks on goal, and particularly in Game 6, uh, they just they literally dominated Pittsburgh. And yes, injuries. And this is really the more disappointing losses for Washington because for three factors. One, you have the back-to-back President's Trophy winners. Two, you have the this is a weakened Pittsburgh team with Sidney Crosby being injured, agents, and people wondering if he was going to get back on the ice because he took a massive hit on the boards, and we're wondering if it was a concussion. But of course, he returned for Game 7 and and made an impact, notching an assist on the first Pittsburgh goal by Rust. Um, but the bottom line is that the Caps just had so many chances but couldn't put one beyond. And in the third period, the time where you expect them to really show up, they managed 8 shots and only 4 were legitimate chances. And they just looked listless. It's like they were just mentally gassed.
I think it's time to
And
break it up, man. It's got to be time.
you know, I've been thinking about it, and I think the salary cap is going to dictate how they're going to break it up. One, you have the expansion draft for the Vegas Knights, which means it's going to cost you probably Phil Brubaker, who's the backup goaltender, or uh, or Orlov, who was a key he was a key part of the Capital defense. So you figure you're gonna lose one of those guys. Um, you got to decide who you're going to pay because a couple of wingers are due pay raises, which means you sign Brooks Orpik, so you got to figure out whether or not you're going to re-sign TJ Oshie or Varansky, or one of those guys is going to have to go. Assuming that you don't do what conventional wisdom says and trade the franchise, which is Alex Ovechkin. Uh, it's going to be some interesting decisions that's going to be made, but I personally believe that the Capitals will hold on to Ovechkin because of history. They let two of their when Peter Bondra retired and Boy Juneau, and they were left with nothing, and the Capitals suffered seasons, and they just lucked out and got the #1 pick, which happened to be. They still went through the same frustrations in the '90s with Bondra and Juneau and even Jaromir Jagr, where they couldn't get out of the second round. So I think if you keep your star, a ridiculous offer on the table, preferably a younger singer or a younger winger, or even a couple of young wingers or young center that you can build your franchise around. I mean, side with Edmonton, even though they lost a game to the Anaheim Mighty Ducks, they've gone through a total rebuilding process built around Connor McDavid, which after about 5 years of tanking. So it just depends on what you do. I'm not sure if the Capitals But you look at the LA Clippers situation. I said you're the only game in town. Your team when you're good. I mean, I know you want to win a championship. I know that's the goal. And why not just retool? You have the Vetchkin's going to be good for another 3 or 4 more years. Why not? Why not just retool instead of just blowing it up? And because a lot of times you don't get to be the benefit guaranteed to be the benefit of a major trade for picks and maybe of 2 or 3 players, which Ovechkin's obviously worth.
Hmm. Well, it would be
It's
interesting to
it's
see. I just thought that this was going to be their year. I mean, they seem to have a little bit more toughness than I was used to seeing them have. Um, the first round, they got tested a little bit, but then they handled the business, gentleman sweep. And then coming into this round, you get Crosby going down, and then they lose the game that he doesn't play in, and then you're like, oh man, they're in serious trouble if that's going to be the case. And Pittsburgh, like you said, they just got some great goaltending, and Russ being in the right spot at the right time when they failed to clear. Just usually that's what happens. People make simple mistakes in the right in front of the goalie, and they usually lead to goals. And that's how Pittsburgh got their first goal, and that basically was enough. The extra one was just icing on the cake. So we'll see going forward. Here in the Eastern Conference, we got Ottawa and Pittsburgh. What do you think, Tyler? Because Ottawa should be nice and rested. They didn't have to play a grueling series. They got to sit at home and watch Pittsburgh fight it out with Washington. Um, they've been pretty good. I got to see them in person a lot this year. Goaltending is pretty good, so that should be a pretty strength on strength series.
Oh, looks like we lost Kyler.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I didn't know if it was just me or if I lost everybody.
He was muted for a bit.
Hold on.
There he
I'm
is.
on. I'm on mute.
We just lost you for a second there too.
Oh, that was weird. I was talking and then all of a sudden. Okay.
All right.
All right. You know where that is. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
One,
So we're back now.
2, 3. Okay. Well, you look at the Capitals roster. The key issue that they have is they signed Brooks Orpik, who's 36, to a multi-year contract. But the majority of the team is pretty young. They've kind of built through the draft and some off of free agency. So I don't think this is the Clippers situation where you sell the old guys. You still have a core that you can build around. Um, folks still got to get paid, but maybe you could trade one of your younger wingers or one of your younger centers and see what kind of value you can get from them. Uh, as we move forward to the other DC team, it's kind of weird, but when you talk about Wizards and Celtics, 3 games. I'm sorry, 5 games, 5 all decided by double digits. It's this team. It's just weird. Um,
Um, I think it's just a thing of the role players playing their best at home and providing that extra spark for their superstar. So like in the game last night for the Celtics, Avery Bradley was on fire.
yeah,
And
25
so
and a half.
right, so that allowed the offense to not have the focus on Isaiah Thomas as much. And so now he becomes even more deadly because now he recognizes that Bradley is on fire. So now he's doing his driving with the intention to get Bradley shots, and now he can pick and choose later in the game when he wants to be aggressive or not because you got to be on your heels because Bradley just cut you up. for
See, the
25
thing,
points in a quarter.
and the scary thing is that the Wizards didn't. Well, it's not like the Wizards are making the adjustments quarter by quarter or half by half. It actually is game by game. Uh, the counter to double, they were actually doubling Isaiah off the curl and getting physical with him, and that's how they blew them out in DC. Isaiah talks about getting calls, and all of a sudden, you know, they kind of back off and they're not as physical. And all Isaiah has to do is just look off a defender that's coming off to the double team, and the open man, of course, happened to be Bradley, and he hit everything in sight. Now, as they go back to DC, I wonder what the adjustment's going to be, because somebody eventually is going to have to hit some shots off the bench for Washington. Uh, Boston's won this series. Boston's pretty much maintained this series on two things: Isaiah being beyond brilliant for three of the games, and the Boston bench has totally owned the Wizards bench.
Well, yeah, the the game where they didn't have probably their best player Oubre off the bench, they actually got a lot of contributions off the bench, and then the game where he was back in, they pretty much got nothing. So that just goes with the weird narrative of this playoff series, this particular Boston and Washington series. I to me, the Wizards know that they don't really have that strong of a bench. They just don't have to fall behind. They just have to they have to find hidden points like offensive rebounds, free throws. They have to find those little inside the game type things that can sustain the lead for them in those stretches where they do have to rest John Wall. I mean, I saw Brooks say he'd love to play him 48 minutes. He's trying to get away with playing him 40. 36 if on a good night, right now in the playoffs. So he's well aware that he can't burn them out. But um, yeah, Washington's just gonna have to get grimy, to offensive rebound, to draw fouls, and make their free throws, get and ones, things like that. To kind of get those hidden points that you don't really show up in the score a lot of times, but they can just keep you in the lead or keep you down long enough where John Wall and Bill can rescue you after they get some rest.
Yeah, I think that in order to, I'm just going to move ahead to Game Seven. I think the Wizards will win Game Six. So, in order to win Game Seven on the road, I think that John Wall and Bradley Beal will have to do the same thing that they did in Atlanta, which is just attack the rim and just go for as much as you can. They may have to do what they did to close out Atlanta, which was score. They combined for 73 points um, in order to close out Atlanta on the road. But Boston's a little bit more physical, particularly on the guards, and they're going to have to get something from Marcin Gortat, who we have not seen almost all series, especially on the road. Um, Somebody's going to have to be that third scorer, be it Gortat, be it Markieff Morris, or even a guy like a Jennings, or or Oubre, or Otto Porter. Just somebody give you a third option that's going to hit a shot when you need to, when they decide to double up on Beal, or they cut off Wall when he decides to penetrate the lane, or or if Wall's struggling and not hitting his perimeter or his mid-range jumper. Uh, Somebody has got to step up for the Wizards to even have a chance to uh, to knock off Boston on the road. Otherwise,
I,
it's
I would
Boston's going to be win the series.
I would really like to see Bradley Beal attack the basket a little bit more, try to go for layups a little bit more. I think he has more layups in the game that he actually pursues at times. I think a lot of times where he struggles in games from shooting his jump shot, he definitely doesn't look to try to go inside and like get a layup or two or get fouled to get to the free throw line a couple times in a row. So I think that that would help out their offense and kind of get him in the mindset where he can get going. You know, get a couple of easy layups, maybe a couple of pull up, bankers from 8 feet, just some easy rhythm type stuff, and then kind of expand your games to the outside, and then see if you can get going for the next two games. Because you're right, if things hold the serve and the home team wins, and then the Wizards win Game 6, then Game 7 is definitely a toss up. I mean, you're definitely gonna need a defensive effort from everybody, and like you said, somebody is gonna be the unsung hero, the person we don't foresee as being the major reason why either team wins. It could be Crowder. He hasn't really had a big series yet. It could be Amir Johnson. He's kind of been the odd man out for Boston. Just somebody over there on their side that kind of could step up in a Game 7 that we haven't really heard a lot from or seem
Look
to
out
be
for
kind of
Rozier. Rozier has had a
exactly.
excellent series. Actually, Rozier is one of the unsung heroes of the series because he's been able to hit some open shots and defend Bradley Beal when Wall goes onto the bench. He gets the Beal assignment and has given him problems. Uh, that also allows Boston to go big on the perimeter when he's in because Crowder can check Porter, and then you can just swing around, and you can also hide Isaiah as well. So uh, Rozier's been huge. Um, Al Horford has outplayed Gortat, which is another big factor in the series. It seems like he's always around the ball, and it's not the first missed shot; it's the offensive rebound, and Horford has had a knack of that. And it's several times, and particularly in Game 5, where uh, games 2 and 5, when Boston was trailing, it would be the offensive rebound that Horford would get, and he'd kick it out to Thomas for a critical three, or Rozier or Crowder. I mean, it was always Horford that was beating Gortat and sometimes Mark Keith Morris to the ball. Uh, he's definitely going to be a factor when when we get to Game 7. Um, somebody's got to block him out, and I don't care if it takes two guys for the Wizards to have a chance. Um, but as we are recording right now, we are checking out the other Western Conference semifinal um, action going on, which is between the Houston Rockets and the San Antonio Spurs. And after the very interesting ending of game uh, Game 5, where Houston, where Manu Ginobili showed up and ended up making 3 critical plays to lead the Spurs to a win without the services of Kawhi Leonard for virtually the last 4 minutes of the fourth quarter and all of overtime. Um, Ginobili stepped up, and Danny Green did also. Um, as you look at tonight, the Spurs currently are they've been up by as much as 25 pretty much all game long. They're going into the fourth quarter with a pretty much actually they're up 24 right now. Uh, as we look into the future, we can pretty much assume that the Spurs are going to knock off the Rockets and close them out this evening in Houston. Um, how would you think about a matchup between the Spurs and the Golden State Warriors without possibly Kawhi Leonard, who's not playing this tonight?
It's gonna be hard for me to see him not playing in this Game 1 of the series because they have so much space for TV. So I probably wouldn't start Today is Thursday. It probably wouldn't start until like on a weekday next week, probably like Tuesday. So I think that would be enough time just for the series itself. I think it would be interesting. I don't know if San Antonio has enough people to guard everybody. Kawhi can't guard everybody. Klay Thompson looked like he finally found his shot in the last game there in Utah. So that's scary because he hasn't really had a good game yet in the playoffs. Kevin Durant looks like he's, doing kind of what's needed. He's kind of being the filler guy. Like, okay, you need me to rebound tonight, I'll rebound. Need to play defense, I'll play defense. Nobody's scoring. Okay, I'll pick up my scoring. So I just don't know without the leader and Tony Parker if they're going to be able to get away with Patty Mills, running point guard against Steph full time. Um, but Greg Popovich is a master, so he'll cook up something and he'll make it closer than it should be. And they'll probably go 6 games, and the Orioles or shake their head and say, we were in a dogfight even though they won 2 games, and then we'll hopefully get the finals that we want.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any, you know, without a quiet 100%. I really see I really see a sweep without a healthy Kawhi. I just see Golden State just having way too many weapons. Um, even inside with JaVale McGee playing probably his best basketball that we've seen since he left Denver. Um, I think that this is going to be one of those rounds where Steph is going to have no problems with Patty Mills. I think that a healthy Kawhi, a less than 100% Kawhi against Kevin Durant is a mismatch. Uh, Even if you go to the bench, who's going to who's going to keep up with Golden State if two guys are shooting well at the same time? Let's say you have Steph has a good night and Klay has a good night. That's a problem. Klay, what if Steph and KD have good nights? That's a real problem because now you can't you can't double. So it's kind of a conundrum, and of course they have a better bench too because uh, you got Sean Livingston, who's probably one of the biggest mismatches in the NBA. And even if you don't play uh, their guard, Clark, their second guard, you still have Iguodala to worry about, who's just as a defensive problem uh, for Kawhi as if even if they go big and put Draymond Green on Kawhi. So there are a lot of options that Mike Brown has to play with. And, Mike Brown's a defensive guy first. So he's going to be prepared for San Antonio. And I think that just without Tony Parker at 100%, this has sweep potential written all over it.
That'd be interesting. I don't know about sweep. I give San Antonio a little bit more credit than that. Give them a little bit more fight and effort. It may look kind of ugly the first 2 games, but hey, first game of the season, Popovich stunned everybody, and they um, beat them, on their home court. So, if anybody's got the key to cooking up something, it would definitely be Greg Popovich because he's definitely figured out what to do with the Rockets. Definitely, Nene getting hurt has changed the series around, and kind of handcuffed an already limited Houston squad as far as bodies. And they're one less body to already short rotation. Harold isn't getting any run. Decker isn't getting any run, so they're kind of running 7 guys, and they're getting pounded because they're just not relenting on defense. They're bumping them hard on defense, making them work on offense, and then when San Antonio has the ball, they're making Harden guard everybody, and pounding them down low, making them guard big guys. He's either getting switched on Aldridge or Gasol, and he's having to take a pounding because they're taking them right to the paint. So Greg Popovich is a master. If he has more than a couple of games to kind of see what you're doing, he can cook up something to counter it, and then you'll have to counter his move, and a lot of guys can't.
Just looking at the story behind the story, does this performance affect people's opinion of James Harden? And now that Harden has kind of shown that the Rockets go as far as Harden goes, uh, just has this will this change anybody's opinion about Harden being the MVP over Westbrook? I mean, we know that the votes are pretty much finished, but does this change the fan opinion, or does this favor Russell Westbrook even more so?
I think at some points, because of the long stretches of time in which his team could not score, it just magnifies what Russell Westbrook did with the cast of characters that he had. Because there are some times where you just kind of look at the game and shake your head and go, he averaged a triple double with these guys as his teammates. Whereas I think now over here with Harden, I think it's just a kind of a mesh of coach, philosophy, GM, and a roster that's kind of put together to do the thing that they talk about. I mean, the Houston Rockets, they have no regard for the middle of the court. It's either dunks, free throws, or threes. That's their philosophy. Daryl Morey is Mr. Analytics. He has the perfect coach, and they've basically put together what they think is the perfect team to play modern basketball. But it still comes to find out you maybe need a true point guard to do what they're trying to do, because at the end of game 5, Harden was a little sticky with the ball, and they didn't seem to have the fluidity and the motion and the movement that you probably need, that you would get from a guy who was a point guard who was running a team in those crucial situations like that. Kind of Harden reverted back to the old Harden, where he was trying to be a finisher and not really a creator and facilitator first, which is kind of what was needed in that stretch of the game. So I know I didn't really answer your question, but it just kind of looks at the two schools of thought, kind of where I'm coming from. So I would kind of lean maybe towards Russell, just because it looks like he had the harder chore for what he accomplished. It's already unfathomable to average a triple double for a season, but to do it with some very subpar teammates as a whole is even more impressive.
I'm going to throw a little thing into the mix here with Harden. Uh, Flip Harden and Chris Paul, and put Chris Paul in Houston. You think they're much better?
Probably yes, even though it's one less quote unquote 3 point shooter. It's a person who can facilitate the game and better on defense. Not to mention that James Harden is still a liability on defense. I know we like to look at just the game of basketball from an offensive standpoint, but you have to factor in some players' defense as well. So I think, yeah, Chris Paul would be a definite upgrade, even though in theory it would take away one of their quote unquote 3 point shooters. But his ability to get into the paint would be just as good as Harden's. So they wouldn't lose anything there.
And the reason why I brought that up is because Paul is going to be one of the biggest free agents coming up this year. There's talk about him being in possibly San Antonio if he decides to leave LA, which personally I believe he won't, um, because of, for one, the lifestyle. Second, he has favor with Doc Rivers, and third, cornerstone guy, and you don't trade cornerstones. You let them walk off on your own terms. And last but not least, you're the only game in town. Need a good draft this year, possibly a good draft next year, and another free agent signing for them to even be close to a playoff contender. So you've got a minimum of 3 more years of being the good team in LA. So why not take advantage of it, not break them up? And and the reason why I'm bringing this in the Houston scenario is because remember, the Clippers were literally a quarter away from knocking off the Rockets and going into the West Finals. And I just think that just they're in the same situation. The Clippers are in the same situation now that they were then. The Rockets are still that same team. They're improved offensively, but McHale still built that team as James Harden and shooters. So it's just interesting to see how these two teams, how the Spurs and the Rockets are going to affect the moves in the Western Conference in the offseason. Meanwhile, as we shift over to the one team that's relaxing and waiting, uh, the Cleveland Cavaliers. Uh, I don't know what to think about them right now as far as matching up against Boston or Washington. I mean, we all know that what they're going to do is similar to Houston, let LeBron facilitate, whether he drives or Kyrie drives, whether Kyrie finishes himself or he kicks it out to one of four shooters. You know, the key is when are they going to show up defensively?
Yeah, you have to keep. Um, it's either one or two methods. You either let LeBron go crazy and try to let everybody else just kind of stay, kind of keep everybody else suppressed, or you try to, let everybody else get theirs and try to keep LeBron suppressed. And I think the second one is the hardest of the two to do. I think it's easier to let LeBron just kind of go crazy and just make him score, 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 keep his assists down, and you might have a better chance that way. But if he can get in there and do what he's been doing the last couple of games, where he's been almost averaging a triple double plus getting almost 40 points a game, yeah, there's nothing you can do unless you're gonna just barrage them and just gun them out from the 3-point line. That would be your only chance against Cleveland the way they're playing right now is just to outscore them from the 3-point line.
And I don't think either team has enough firepower to do that consistently. Neither
No,
Boston nor Washington.
no, not 4 games in a row worth of 3-point shooting. Maybe the Warriors, yes, but no, not anybody in the East. That's the reason why they haven't really been challenged. Is because you haven't seen that Sports Center game where you see one of these guys against Cleveland hit 8, 9 threes in a game, and either keep them in the game until the end where they can win it, or blow them out. It's because they haven't lost a game yet at all. I haven't really even been challenged except for the very first game against Indiana Pacers, where Paul George was upset that he didn't get the last shot. That's the only game that's actually been kind of like, hey, we might lose this game. The rest of these games have been just glorified practices, competitive practices is what I like to call them sometimes.
Cause looking at their opponent after Indiana, Toronto, which they swept. Uh, you look at Toronto and Masai Ujiri, who's the general manager, spoke to the media uh, after just a day after Kyle Lowry declared that he will be opting out of his contract and be looking for a new team. And he's actually put out there that he is thinking about looking for a team in the Western Conference, which immediately brings up San Antonio. Uh, that's in the mix, not possibly the Clippers if they decide to let go of Chris Paul. Uh, Lowry has also mentioned Philadelphia, a return home, as he is a graduate of Villanova University. uh,
Now,
which would be ridiculous. No, I mean,
now,
yeah,
now,
Kyle would want to go home, and they probably overpay him to come there, but no, he can't talk about Philly and winning championships. No.
I don't know how their numbers work, and I know that Holiday, has a lot of standing in their community and things, and I know he just got signed again, but he would behoove himself if he would really want to go. If he really wanted to win, he'd go to the Pelicans because that's all they're missing is a scoring point guard to run the offense that they need to run for Gentry, and to have a point guard who is just adequate from 3-point shooting. 38%, 37%. Lowry fits the bill perfect. I think that would be the team he would flourish the most at. To me, I don't think Tony Parker is going to go out on an injury. I think he's going to come back, and that next year may be his last year, but he's going to go out playing and not injured. So I think that it's meant the timing just might not be right for San Antonio to get Lowry this year.
I'm all for me personally. I'm all for Patty Mills taking over the reins as being the starter for San Antonio. I know there are some weaknesses there. People don't feel that he is a point guard. It would be kind of a trial by fire. But I think Mills is ready. I think Mills has shown that he can handle the reins. He can get it to the floor of the offense, despite the fact that that last second shot, uh, Gasol botched the screen and roll that was supposed to be called with Mills. They had a perfect play, and Mills actually hit the shot, but Harden forced him to not get it off in time. But I think Mills can run the team, and I think that he's very adequate for guard. He's an adequate shooter, which is what they need. Um, and he can also penetrate and kick as well. Um, I think he's ready. I don't know if Pop believes he is. Pop's played him plenty of minutes to show that he can do it. So that's going to be very interesting how those the point guards will move around in the Western Conference. Uh, but going back to the Raptors, Masai Ujiri went forward with the media and said that he wants to change the culture. Usually, when those words are used, that's speaking of a breakup or a coaching change. Uh, not to not to speculate here, but I think a coaching change is going to happen, which would be crazy. Uh,
Well, I mean, come
Casey's a
on, man.
Casey's a defensive
Dwayne
guy.
Casey, and that's the problem. This isn't 1992 basketball no more. You need an offensive guy. Now, see, you could have you could do kind of like Steve Kerr. Get you a
Okay.
defensive coordinator guy like Mike Brown that
Okay.
kind of help
Mhm.
you, so your defense isn't like D'Antoni, where you just out here with nothing on defense wise. But at least so if something happens, it's easier to take the defensive guy and put him in your place and have all your assistants do all the fun offensive stuff, and then he can just micromanage the defense. Then the other way around, have your principal coach be a defensive guy, and then be like, oh, look at this lead where everybody's scoring 110, 112, and we're out here trying to keep the score down. No, you're fighting against the tide. Go ahead and up your tempo, play a little bit faster, and the defense that you do have will show up, and you'll win more games than you lose that way because you'll have more possessions. And if you're good on defense, you'll stop more people. I think
And
that I think that if you're going in the NBA right now, if you're going with a defensive oriented coach, that's like his number one thing. I think you're going into a losing battle. You need to have a guy who's offensive minded and then has a good staff of defensive assistant coaches around.
I also believe that that's going to be a major issue. They have a personnel problem there too. Uh, DeMar DeRozan is a conundrum in this day and time because he's not a 3-point shooter. He's actually, there's a stat floating around that's he only DeAndre Jordan in LA scores more more percentage of 2-point baskets than DeMar DeRozan.
Yeah, yeah. He's a guy who's like the Rip Hamilton of his era. He's really good from 17, 18, that kind of no man's land right now of basketball, like I was talking about with the Rockets, the part that they don't value, you know, the part that's in between the lane and the 3 point line. And he is a killer in there, but that's not the way they're playing basketball these days. So, fundamentally, when you're putting these teams together now, you have to kind of account for what this guy can do, and he's not really fitting into what most modern styles are these days as far as how people are drawing up offense. Like right now, Pop, with the way that he's running San Antonio's offense with these two big guys dumping the ball in and playing off of that, I mean, that is like considered to be old school Neanderthal basketball right now in this day and age, when that was the norm 7 years ago.
All right, to close it out, we just took this is on a final note. We saw that uh, starting on Sunday, the sports program E60 will replace the sports reporters. Sports reporters last week closed after 37 years of programming. Do you have any type of memories of the sports reporters and how that impacted the way you looked at television, or any ideas, or did it introduce to you um, any announcers or commentators?
I kind of have like a weird relationship as a kid, like pre-teenager, hated the sports reporters. Oh, it was so boring. Didn't get it at all. It was just in the way of NFL game day at the time. So that was always the mainstay. But then as a teenager, and I started kind of understanding sports more on a writer level and things like that, it introduced me to Bill Roden and Bill Connolly and Bill Ryan and all of the Mike Lupica and all of these writers, Will Bond and Kornheiser and all of these guys around the country, Ralph Wiley, that were doing all these great things. Brian Burwell, just so many people through the years that were doing all these great things in that age when newspaper writers were the thing to be. Even way before television and ESPN was popular. It was still the age where these guys were still breaking stories and scoops, and it was cool to hear their points of view from their national kind of view. And then Dick Schaap, of course, as the host, as I became more involved in sports, I figured, found out how big of a role he played as far as, you know, interviews and being there for different African American athletes as far as their fight for civil rights outside and inside of the lines of sports. He was always there as a champion for them. So, you know, with him being the host, it kind of like perked my interest as well. And then as an older person, it basically helped me do this podcast when I host it. I kind of try to use the sports reporters motto John Saunders kind of used, where, hey, I'm just here to kind of keep the car on the road, and all these guys right here get a turn to drive, and I just hold it, then I just grab the steering wheel back when they start getting off the road, and then we go on down the line and have a great show. So, yeah, definitely be missed. I'll definitely miss getting up on Sunday mornings, checking out what they have to say about the big national stories. So good run, and just another way that media and things are changing at ESPN.
All right, as we close out, I just want to say that I will miss the sports reporters. Of course, that was a big deal for me, even as a kind of as a teenager, going into my late teens. I finally got a chance to uh, work in sports capacity immediately as I entered North Carolina A&T University and began a internship in the athletic media relations department. So I had to write game stories. I had to write recaps. I had to preview preview stories. And if I didn't have the sports reporters, I wouldn't have an understanding of how to write a simple story, or as later on we would write features on particular athletes, and some would be set nationally eventually. Um, but I had to do a project that eventually became the Street and Smith's documentary on basketball, and North Carolina A&T being ranked the uh, number 62 program in NCAA history in basketball in terms of success. Uh, that the sports reporters taught me how research matters in creating the story and the narrative, and how you have to back up everything you say with facts, or it appears to be, out of order. So it allowed me to be more careful in my research, my stories, and it taught me how to ask the right questions when it came to interviewing people. And I definitely appreciate everyone involved. Several of those reporters are very much active. It's not a retirement. I even got a chance to hear Bill Roden, who's now featured on The Undefeated. As a matter of fact, he has a scholar program at a few HBCUs. I actually had the chance to meet the Roden scholar today uh, at a function at A&T. So I'm glad to see that the youth are actually following in his footsteps. Um, for Don De Laurenti, for my producer, Classic, for the CSPN, this is Tyler Ball. And now you know the score.